The year was 1940. Germany began planning to invade Switzerland, a small country in Europe. But the Germans hesitated. Why? The first reason was that Switzerland was neutral. What does neutral mean? It means that the country doesn't engage in wars. Swiss neutrality means that the country does not take political sides between two nations, doesn't participate in any military operations abroad, and doesn't go to war with anyone. But the principle of neutrality faced tests during World War II. During the war, Hitler occupied all of Switzerland's neighbors. Germany surrounded the country from the north, east, and west, and in addition to that, Italy was allied with Germany, so Switzerland was all alone. So what did Switzerland do? As a neutral country, Switzerland did not take a political stance between Germany and its enemies. And although the Nazis wrote that Switzerland had no right to exist, trade between Switzerland and Germany increased. The American journal Foreign Affairs wrote in 1944, Swiss industries pay ransom for the country's independence. Through trade agreements with Germany, Switzerland obtains from German-dominated Europe and through German-occupied ports the goods it needs to stay alive. It has few natural resources and its economic structure has always depended on foreign trade, with imports far exceeding exports. But normalization with Germany was unpopular among the Swiss, and they tried to reduce exports with Germany and resist rapprochement with it. In 1943, Switzerland sent a message to the British and Americans affirming the Swiss government's intention to reduce exports to Germany and German-occupied territories. So if Switzerland had ties with the British and Americans and was a small country, why didn't Germany invade Switzerland like it did with other countries like the Netherlands and Denmark? The same Foreign Affairs article gives us an answer. It says the Swiss army numbered about 500,000 men and should be classified as a first-class standing army. And that's not all. The 1939 mobilization, which was proportionally the largest in Europe and included 40% of all Swiss men, was completed in 2 days. Hardly any Swiss citizen today is without a military rifle, a steel helmet, and ammunition in his home. Almost every village in Switzerland has been turned into a stronghold of defense. In these fortifications, Switzerland invested more than $175 million. Needless to say, the mountain railways, the main target of the aggressor, are mined and can be blown up if necessary in the first hour of an invasion. So Switzerland wasn't a country, it was a mountainous military base ready for any attack from any side. If Hitler had tried to enter Switzerland like he did with the rest of Europe, his army, even if it did not fail, would have faced extremely bloody resistance from the Swiss. All of his strategic resources, instead of being used against the Russians, the British, or the Americans, would have been consumed against the Swiss. And in short, it wasn't worth it. So what happened after the fall of Hitler and the Nazis? During the Cold War, Europe was split between a communist East and a non-communist West. And Switzerland, of course, as a non-communist country with a democratic capitalist system and cultural closeness to the Western Bloc countries, collaborated with the Americans and Western Europe. Wrong. First of all, Switzerland still pursued a policy of neutrality. It even refused to join the United Nations, which nearly every country in the world was a member of, including the Soviets and the Americans. With its rejection of the United Nations, Switzerland also refused to join NATO and the European Economic Community. Switzerland wanted to avoid European integration militarily and economically in order to preserve its neutrality, or more specifically, to maintain its freedom to manage these matters without obligations that could jeopardize neutrality. So with that in mind, did Switzerland normalize relations with the Soviets and the Communists? No. A classified statement from the US State Department during the Cold War describes how Americans understood Switzerland's inability to join any international organization opposing communism or the Soviet Union because of the Swiss government's deep-rooted commitment to neutrality. But the same statement says, on the other hand, as authoritative Swiss spokesmen have frequently made clear, Switzerland regards itself as belonging to the Western community of nations. The Swiss are inherently hostile to Soviet communism, and they fear and distrust the Soviet Union, despite their desire to remain neutral. So the Swiss were also anti-Soviet, but they weren't going to enter any obligations against them. That helped Switzerland become a diplomatic hub for conferences between the Americans and the Soviets. In addition to that, Switzerland had open economic relations with the Soviet Union. Although these relations were small, American businessmen used them to send American technology to Switzerland and from there to the Soviet Union, despite the strategic risk to the US technological advantage. All of that was because of Switzerland's neutrality policy, and that neutrality continued even after the Soviet Union collapsed. When the European Union was founded and expanded eastwards, Switzerland remained outside of it, but it joined the Schengen area in 2008 and became a UN member in 2002. However, this neutrality changed with the Ukraine war. Switzerland took a position. It officially announced after the war began that it condemns Russia's invasion of Ukraine in the strongest terms. And it wasn't just words. Switzerland imposed sanctions on Russia alongside the European Union in financial and trade sectors, especially arms exports. Does this stance abandon Switzerland's neutrality? The Swiss government responded to this question and said no. Neutrality, in the broader sense, is understood to be the policy of neutrality. This includes all measures taken by Switzerland to protect the credibility and effectiveness of its neutrality. The neutrality policy affords a broad scope of action to be able to respond to international developments. Russia's military aggression against Ukraine is a serious violation of the most fundamental norms of international law and is without precedent in recent European history. Within the scope of its political room for maneuver, the Federal Council took this into account in its decision to join the EU sanctions. So Switzerland is saying that Russia's actions, from its perspective, were so serious that it could not ignore them. So why had Switzerland imposed sanctions on Russia today, but not on Germany back then? There's no official answer, of course, but we must remember that Germany surrounded Switzerland during World War II, and it was more important for the Swiss that they avoid war, destruction, and confrontation with Germany. Today, however, Switzerland has broader political maneuvering space, thanks to its geographical distance from the war and support and consultation with global organizations like the EU and the UN, and thus Switzerland remains neutral.